The wrought iron gates of the Blackwood estate were less a welcome and more a warning. They rose like skeletal hands against the bruised twilight sky, crowned with sharp, fleur-de-lis spears that seemed designed to impale the clouds. From the back of the sputtering Ford T taxicab, Clara Hayes, known for the foreseeable future as Dorothy Edwards, watched them swing open with a low, mournful groan. Each inch of progress up the winding, gravel-lined driveway felt like a step deeper into the lion's den. Her hands, gloved in pristine white cotton, were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. Beneath the demure, cloche hat pulled low over her brow, her mind was a maelstrom of fear and resolve. This was the home of Arthur Blackwood. The name was a whisper in the city's smoky jazz clubs, a curse on the lips of rival bootleggers, and a prayer for those who sought his protection. To the public, he was an enigmatic businessman who had amassed a fortune in shipping and logistics. To the underworld, he was a king, his throne built on crates of illicit Canadian whiskey and the loyalty of men who feared him more than God. But to Clara, he was a means to an end, a dangerous, magnetic, and necessary key to unlocking the vengeance she craved. The mansion materialized from the manicured grounds, a Gothic marvel of dark stone, ivy-choked walls, and mullioned windows that glowed like embers in the fading light. It was a fortress disguised as a home, exuding an aura of old money and new, ruthless power. When the taxi shuddered to a halt before the imposing oak doors, the driver, a man with a cap pulled low, and fear etched into the lines of his face, wouldn't even meet her eyes as she paid him. "Good luck, miss," he'd mumbled, a sentiment that sounded more like a condolence. Taking a breath that did little to calm the frantic hummingbird wings of her heart, she ascended the stone steps. The Dorothy Edwards persona was a carefully constructed armor, a soft-spoken, bookish young woman from a respectable but impoverished family, eminently qualified to archive the Blackwood family's extensive collection of documents and correspondence. The real Clara Hayes was a phantom, a girl whose life had been burnt to the ground by a single man's greed, leaving only the cold, hard desire for retribution. And that man was Walter Thorne. Thorne, the serpent in the city's garden, was Arthur Blackwood's most bitter rival. Clara's logic was simple, if terrifyingly risky. The enemy of her enemy was her best hope. She would find the proof she needed to destroy Thorne within these hallowed, dangerous walls. The door was opened before her knuckles could even graze the wood. A butler, tall and thin as a spectre, with a face so devoid of expression it might as well have been carved from marble, regarded her with cool indifference. "Miss Edwards, I presume?" His voice was a dry rustle of old paper. "Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Blackwood." She held out the letter of introduction, her hand miraculously steady. "He didn't take it. He's expecting you. This way." She followed him into a grand hall that silenced her breath. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white marble, polished to a mirror's shine, reflecting the colossal crystal chandelier that dripped light from the vaulted ceiling 2 stories above. A sweeping staircase, its banister a dark, sinuous serpent of carved mahogany, coiled its way into the upper shadows of the house. From a distant room, the sultry, melancholic notes of a lone saxophone drifted through the air, a sound both seductive and sorrowful. The mansion wasn't just opulent, it was alive, its silence punctuated by the ghost of music and the scent of expensive cigar smoke, bourbon, and a faint, heady perfume of night-blooming jasmine. The butler, whose name she learned was Howard, led her not to a stuffy office, but toward a set of towering double doors. "Mr. Blackwood will see you in the library." He opened the doors and stepped aside, and Clara walked into the heart of the beast's lair. The library was a cathedral of knowledge and secrets. Walls were lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, their spines gleaming like jewels in the soft lamplight. A fire crackled in a cavernous stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows that made the room seem to breathe. And there, standing by the hearth with his back to her, was the man himself. Arthur Blackwood wasn't as large as she had imagined. He was tall, lean, with the coiled energy of a panther. He turned slowly, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. The stories, the whispers, had failed to capture the sheer force of his presence. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his dark hair impeccably styled, but it was his face that held her captive. It was a study in sharp angles and controlled intensity, handsome in a way that was more dangerous than charming. And his eyes, they were the color of a stormy sky, a startling, clear gray that seemed to miss nothing. As they settled on her, she felt an unnerving sensation of being seen, not as Dorothy the archivist, but as Clara the intruder. Her secrets laid bare under his penetrating gaze. "Miss Edwards," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as the whiskey in his glass, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Blackwood." She dipped her head in a gesture of respect she hoped concealed her racing pulse. "It is an honor." He gestured to a leather armchair near the fire. "Please." He did not sit himself, but instead moved to a massive mahogany desk, leaning against its edge. The position was casual, yet it established an immediate imbalance of power. He was at ease in his domain, while she was a supplicant perched on the edge of her seat. "Your references are impeccable," he began, his eyes never leaving her face. "Vassar College speaks highly of your diligence and discretion. Tell me, what draws a woman of your education to such a dusty profession, cataloguing the papers of a family you do not know?" The question was a test. She had rehearsed for this. "I believe history lives in the details, sir. In the letters, the ledgers, the forgotten notes. It's a passion of mine, to bring order to the past." She folded her hands in her lap, a portrait of quiet academic fervor. "Your family has a long and storied history in this city. It would be a privilege to preserve it." He took a slow sip from his glass, his gaze unwavering. It felt less like an interview and more like an interrogation. Preservation requires honesty. An archive is only as truthful as the archivist. "Do you consider yourself a truthful woman, Miss Edwards?" The blood rushed in her ears, a direct hit. Was this a guess, or was he toying with her? "I believe in the truth of the historical record, yes. It is my duty to be its faithful servant." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that did not reach his cool, appraising eyes. "A good answer. Many people in this city have a flexible relationship with the truth." He pushed himself off the desk and began to pace slowly before the fire, his movements fluid and deliberate. "This house contains many records, business dealings, personal correspondence. Some of it is mundane, some of it is not. Discretion, as my butler Howard will have no doubt emphasized, is not a request here. It is a condition of breathing." The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in silken words. Clara's throat went dry. "I understand completely, Mr. Blackwood." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne mingling with the whiskey and smoke. He was taller than she'd realized. She had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze, and she hated the feeling of vulnerability it gave her. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she felt as if he were peeling back the layers of her carefully crafted facade one by one. He saw the fire she tried to bank, the grief she kept locked away. He saw the truth, or some dangerous approximation of it. Then, just as the silence became unbearable, he stepped back. "The position is yours, should you want it. Your work would begin tomorrow. The archive is in the East Wing. You will be given a room. Howard will show you." Relief washed over her so intensely it almost made her dizzy. She had done it. She was in. but the relief was immediately followed by a cold dread. This man was more perceptive and more formidable than she could have ever imagined from the whispers on the street. Her simple plan suddenly felt naive, a child's game in a world of sharks. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice a little breathless. "I accept. I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't, Miss Edwards," Arthur Blackwood said, turning back to the fire. It was a clear dismissal. The past can be a dangerous place. One can get lost in it. As Howard escorted her from the library, Clara risked one last glance over her shoulder. Arthur hadn't moved. He was a silhouette against the flames, a solitary king in his castle of secrets. As the heavy doors closed behind her, sealing her inside this gilded cage, she knew his final words were not a warning about history, but about himself. She had won her way into the lion's den, but as she followed the silent butler up the grand staircase, the chilling realization settled upon her. The lion had been expecting her all along. The days settled into a deceptive rhythm. By daylight, Clara was the consummate archivist, Dorothy Edwards. She lost herself in the scent of aging paper and dried ink. Her world contained within the East Wing's archive room, a quiet, sun-drenched space filled with mahogany cabinets and towering stacks of document boxes tied with faded ribbon. She meticulously organized Blackwood family correspondence dating back to the Gilded Age, catalogued shipping manifests from the turn of the century, and pieced together the legitimate face of the family's empire. It was mind-numbingly dull, and precisely the cover she needed. Her diligence was her shield. No one would suspect the quiet, spectacled woman, carefully preserving their history, was in fact plotting to dismantle another's. But when night fell, the mansion transformed, and so did she. The grand, echoing halls became a hunting ground. After the last servant had retired, and the house was submerged in a thick, watchful silence, broken only by the solemn ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer, Clara would slip from her room. Dressed in dark, practical clothing, her shoes in her hand, she became a phantom. She learnt the geography of the shadows, the patterns of the few guards who patrolled the grounds, the specific floorboards that groaned in protest. The house itself became a character in her silent drama, a sleeping giant whose secrets she was determined to steal. Her initial explorations were cautious, mapping the layout, testing locked doors, noting the placement of windows. She found ledgers in a secondary study detailing Arthur's legitimate businesses, all meticulously kept and utterly useless to her. Her true target, the heart of the operation, remained locked away. Arthur Blackwood's private office, on the ground floor, the very room where she had first met him. Its door was always locked, and a heavy-set guard was often posted nearby until the early hours. Arthur, for his part, was an unnerving and unpredictable presence. He would disappear for days at a time, his powerful Bentley roaring down the driveway before dawn, only to reappear without warning. He began to visit her in the archives, a silent predator observing his prey. He would appear in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that same casual intensity, and watch her work. "Finding any skeletons in our closets, Miss Edwards?" he asked one afternoon, his voice a low rumble that startled her from her concentration. She looked up, her heart giving a painful lurch. She forced a small academic smile. "Only a few questionable investments made by your great-grandfather in the 1890s, Mr. Blackwood. Nothing scandalous, I'm afraid." He walked into the room, picking up a leather-bound diary from a stack she had set aside. He flipped through the delicate, spidery script. "My grandmother, she believed in honesty above all things, a rare quality." He set the diary down and his grey eyes fixed on hers. "Tell me, do you believe a person can be loyal to more than one master?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy as cigar smoke, It was a baited hook, and she knew it. "I believe a person's ultimate loyalty should be to the truth, sir," she answered carefully, her gaze steady. He almost smiled. "The truth," he mused, as if tasting the word. "It changes depending on who tells it. Remember that." He left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving her with the distinct feeling that he had seen straight through her carefully constructed persona and was enjoying the game far too much. This became their ritual, a dangerous dance of veiled questions and guarded answers. The closer she felt she was getting to his secrets, the more his presence seemed to pervade her thoughts. She began to notice things, the way a slight furrow would appear between his brows when he was deep in thought, the rare, genuine smile that would transform his hard features when he spoke to his aging Irish wolfhound, the sheer, unadulterated power he commanded with a single quiet word to his men. An unwilling fascination took root in her, a poisonous vine of attraction wrapping itself around the cold iron of her resolve. She despised the feeling, despised the flicker of warmth she felt when his stormy eyes held hers a second too long. He was a monster, a criminal, a tool for her vengeance. He could be nothing more. After 2 weeks of fruitless searching in the accessible parts of the mansion, she knew she could wait no longer. She had to get into his office. She'd observed that on Tuesday nights, Arthur hosted a high-stakes poker game in a detached cigar lounge on the far side of the estate. The game lasted well into the morning, and the guard was often pulled from his post at the office door to serve drinks and keep watch on the wealthy and sometimes quarrelsome guests. It was the perfect window. That night, she waited until the last sounds of the poker game, a burst of laughter, the clink of glasses, had faded into a distant murmur. Her hands were slick with nervous sweat as she knelt before the office door, a set of delicate lockpicks she had hidden in the spine of a hollowed-out book held in a trembling grip. The silence was absolute. The intricate tumblers of the lock felt impossibly complex, each tiny click echoing like a gunshot in her ears. Finally, with a soft snick, the lock gave way. She pushed the door open a fraction of an inch and listened. Slipping inside, she closed it gently behind her, the latch catching with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud. The room was dark, save for the pale moonlight slanting through the tall mullioned windows. It smelled of him, that same scent of old books, whiskey, and expensive cologne. It was disorienting, an invasion of his most personal space that felt both thrilling and terrifyingly intimate. Using a small shielded penlight, she went straight to his desk. It was a massive piece of mahogany, neat and orderly. No incriminating papers were left in sight. Of course not. He was too careful for that. Her target was the bottom right-hand drawer, the only one that was locked. Working quickly, she set about picking the smaller, more delicate lock. This one was easier. As it opened, her beam of light fell upon a dark leather ledger. Her breath caught. This had to be it. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat columns of figures and names. At a glance, she saw shipments, dates, and locations that corresponded with known liquor smuggling routes. And then she saw it. A series of entries under the heading, WT Distribution, Walter Thorne. This was it. The proof of their dealings, the link she needed to bring to the federal agents who had dismissed her case as a tragic business failure. Her hands shook as she pulled out the tiny, state-of-the-art spy camera, her one expensive and desperate purchase for this mission. She propped the ledger open, aiming the camera to capture the crucial page. Just as she depressed the shutter, a quiet click echoing in the silent room, she heard it. Footsteps, panic, cold and absolute, seized her. They were slow, unhurried, coming down the hall, straight towards the office. She snapped the ledger shut, shoved it back in the drawer, and locked it in a single, frantic movement. But there was no time to get to the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. The brass doorknob began to turn. Her eyes darted around the room. There was nowhere to go. In a last, desperate act of self-preservation, she dove behind the heavy, floor-length velvet curtains that flanked the window, pressing herself flat against the cold glass. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she was sure he could hear it. The door swung open, and Arthur Blackwood stepped inside. He didn't turn on a light, but stood silhouetted against the lesser darkness of the hallway. For a terrible moment she thought he knew, but he walked calmly to his desk, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter that sat there. He took a sip, his back to her, and let out a long, weary sigh. The poker game must have ended. He seemed restless. He paced the length of the room once, then twice. Then he walked towards the window, towards her. He stopped, directly in front of the curtains, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He pulled one side back slightly, not where she was hiding, but the other, gazing out at the moonlit grounds. He was inches away. If she reached out a hand, she could touch the fine wool of his suit jacket. The proximity was agonizing. Fear warred with a strange, dizzying awareness of him as a man, not just a mark. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, lost in his own thoughts. Then he let the curtain fall back into place. He finished his drink in one smooth motion, placed the glass back on the desk with a soft clink, and walked out of the room, closing the door firmly behind him. Clara remained frozen behind the curtain for a full 10 minutes, her muscles screaming in protest, until she was certain he was gone. When she finally stumbled out, her legs weak and trembling, she felt no sense of victory. She had the photograph, the first real piece of evidence. But the close call had stripped away any lingering sense of confidence. This wasn't a game. Arthur Blackwood was not a man to be underestimated. As she crept back to the safety of her room, the chilling certainty settled over her. She had been the cat stalking her prey, but tonight she had felt the sharp, terrifying reality of being the mouse, and she knew, with a dreadful clarity, that the cat was simply letting her run for a little while longer. The near discovery in his office left Clara profoundly shaken. The game had changed. Every shadow now seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the old mansion's floors sounded like an approaching footstep. She threw herself into her work with a frantic, almost feverish energy, hoping that by perfectly embodying Dorothy Edwards, she could somehow erase the memory of Clara Hayes, the terrified trespasser huddled behind a curtain. But the fear was a cold stone in her gut, and it was made colder still by Arthur's altered demeanor. He no longer engaged her in their verbal sparring matches. The probing questions ceased. Instead, he watched her from a distance, his gray eyes shadowed and unreadable. The silence that grew between them was more unnerving than any interrogation. It was the patient, predatory silence of a cat that has cornered its mouse and is simply deciding when to strike. This new coldness did not quell the treacherous fascination she felt. It stoked it, twisting the unwanted attraction into a knot of fear and longing in her chest. She found herself watching him too, the tension in his jaw, the way he moved with a dangerous grace that was at odds with the brutal empire he commanded. The breaking point came on a dreary, rain-lashed afternoon a week later. Howard appeared at the archive door, his face as impassive as ever. "Mr. Blackwood requires your presence in his office." Clara's blood ran cold. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. She followed the butler down the grand staircase, her sensible shoes making soft, apologetic sounds on the marble. The rain beat a frantic tattoo against the windows, mirroring the frantic rhythm of her heart. This was it. The game was over. When she entered the office, Arthur was standing by the window, staring out at the storm-ravaged gardens. He didn't turn round immediately. The air in the room was thick with the scent of rain, old paper, and a tension so palpable she could taste it, metallic, like blood. "Close the door, Miss Edwards," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. She did as she was told, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. He finally turned to face her. In his hand, he held a single sheet of paper. "I had a further inquiry made into your references," he stated, his tone deceptively casual. "A mere formality. One of your former employers, a Professor Albright from Vassar, was a particularly glowing advocate for your character." Clara held her breath. She had invented Professor Albright, banking on the unlikelihood of anyone checking so minor a detail. "The thing is," Arthur continued, taking a slow step towards her, "Vassar College has no record of a Professor Albright ever having been on their faculty, not in the last 50 years. He stopped in front of his desk, the damning paper held lightly between his fingers. "A small inconsistency, but I find it's the small things that tell the truest stories." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling. She opened her mouth to form a denial, a plausible lie, but no words came. Her mind was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated panic. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. He closed the remaining distance between them in 2 fluid strides. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood before her, his presence overwhelming, boxing her in against the edge of the massive desk. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, hating the weakness in her voice. "Don't you?" His eyes, the color of the storm outside, bored into her. "You walk through my house like a ghost. You answer my questions with riddles, and you wear your lies like a second skin. You are many things, Miss Edwards, but a simple archivist is not one of them." His proximity was suffocating. She could feel the heat of his body, see the flecks of charcoal in the gray of his irises. Her carefully maintained composure finally shattered, replaced by a surge of defiant anger at him, at Walter Thorne, at the entire world that had forced her into this corner. "You know nothing about me. I know you're a magnificent liar," he countered, his voice a low growl. "But your eyes tell the truth. They are filled with fire and grief." His hand came up, not to strike her, but to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking softly against her skin. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture was more disarming than any threat. What great loss put that look there. A choked sob caught in her throat. His insight was a physical blow, striking the very heart of the wound she kept hidden. She tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. The confrontation, charged with weeks of suspicion and forbidden attraction, had reached its flashpoint. The air crackled. It was no longer an interrogation. It was a collision. "Let go of me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me your name," he commanded, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Your real name?" "No." The word was a breath of defiance that sealed her fate. His control snapped. With a low groan that was equal parts frustration and surrender, he lowered his head and crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a storm, a whirlwind of pent-up tension and raw, unspoken desire. It was demanding, punishing, and utterly overwhelming. One of his hands tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head back, while the other slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Clara's mind screamed in protest, but her body betrayed her. A wave of dizzying heat washed over her, melting the icy resolve in her veins. She found her hands fisted in the lapels of his suit jacket, clinging to him as the world spun away. The kiss spoke of everything they couldn't say: his suspicion, her desperation, and the violent, undeniable magnetism that had been arcing between them from the very beginning. Just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He broke away, breathing heavily, his forehead resting against hers for a bare second. His eyes were dark, turbulent, and for the first time, she saw not a predator, but a man as caught in the storm as she was. He released her and stepped back, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The spell was broken. Humiliation and rage washed through Clara. He hadn't just kissed her, he had stripped her bare, exposing the vulnerability she fought so hard to conceal. Without another word, he turned his back on her. "Get out." She fled, her cheeks burning, her lips still tingling from the force of his. She didn't look back. The kiss changed everything. It hung between them, a silent, charged memory. Clara was a wreck, her focus shattered. The man she had to deceive, the monster whose secret she had to steal, had touched the very core of her. That night, sleep offered no escape. She was tormented by the memory, by her own traitorous response. Late the next evening, consumed by a restless energy, she found herself drifting through the silent corridors. As she passed his office, she noticed something that made her stop dead. The door was unlocked. A single, low-wattage lamp cast a warm glow from within, illuminating the massive desk, and there, laid open as if in invitation, was a ledger. A trap. Her mind screamed it. It was too easy, too obvious. After the confrontation, after the kiss, this could only be a deliberate snare. He was testing her, waiting for her to make the final, fatal mistake. She should turn round, go back to her room, and admit defeat. But the desire for vengeance, the raw, aching need that had driven her for so long, was a powerful poison. What if it wasn't a trap? What if, in his own emotional turmoil, he had been careless? She had to know. Her heart pounding a deafening rhythm against her ribs, she slipped into the room. The ledger was different from the one she'd photographed before. The entries were bolder, more explicit, and there, on the open page, was a detailed account of a shipment, not of whiskey, but of military-grade firearms. The buyer was listed with the initials WT. The destination was a warehouse known to be Walter Thorne's primary stronghold. This was more than she had ever hoped for. This would not just ruin Thorne. It would put him in a federal prison for the rest of his life. Blinded by the prize, her caution evaporated. She pulled the small camera from its hiding place in her dress pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She aimed, focused, and pressed the shutter. The quiet click of the mechanism was the loudest sound she had ever heard. "I was hoping you'd find that interesting." The voice came from the doorway. It was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of surprise. Clara froze, her back to him, the camera still in her hand. Slowly she turned. Arthur Blackwood stood there, leaning against the door jamb, not with a gun, but with an expression of profound, almost sorrowful finality on his face. He wasn't angry. He was simply watching the final move in a game he had already won. His eyes dropped to the camera in her hand, then rose to meet hers. He pushed himself off the frame and took a step into the room. The trap sprung, the cage door swinging shut. Was the search worth it, Miss Edwards? The world seemed to shrink to the confines of the lamplit office. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was a slow, merciless countdown to her fate. Clara stood frozen, the tiny camera feeling as heavy and damning as a murder weapon in her hand. Every escape route her mind frantically sought was a dead end. The windows were too high, the door was blocked, and the man standing before her held all the power. The Dorothy Edwards persona disintegrated completely, burned away by the raw, consuming terror of being caught. All that remained was Clara Hayes, daughter of the ruined, avenger of the dead, and she was about to pay the ultimate price for her gamble. She expected rage. She braced herself for the cold fury of a king betrayed in his own castle. She imagined a gun being drawn, a curt order to his men. Instead, Arthur Blackwood simply walked to the decanter on his desk and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his movements fluid and unhurried. The sheer calmness of the act was more terrifying than any outburst. He pushed one of the glasses across the polished mahogany surface towards her. It was not an offer of peace. It was the formal gesture of a duelist before the final, fatal shot. "Drink," he said, his voice a low command. "You look like you need it." She didn't move. Her throat was too tight to speak, let alone swallow. He took a slow sip from his own glass, his stormy eyes never leaving her. "I knew from the first day," he said, his voice quiet, conversational. "You were too hungry. Your eyes held a fire that no simple archivist could possess. I just couldn't figure out the game, so I let you play. I wanted to see where you would lead me." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. He had been toying with her from the very beginning. Her careful deceptions, her sleepless nights, her moments of near discovery, they had all been part of his own private theater. She was not the cat. She had been the mouse in his labyrinth all along. The humiliation was a bitter acid in her mouth. "So what now?" she finally managed to ask, her voice a raw whisper. "Do your men take me down to the river?" A flicker of something, was it surprise? Respect? Crossed his features. Most people would be begging by now. "I'm done begging," she said, a spark of her old fire returning. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. If she was going to die, she would do it as Clara Hayes, not as some whimpering, fictional secretary. "Just tell me one thing, is the ledger real?" He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "The firearms, the shipment, the destination, every word of it. Walter Thorne is arming himself for a war." The confirmation sent a chill through her, a fear that momentarily eclipsed her own. "A war? With whom?" "With me," Arthur said simply. He took another drink, his knuckles white around the glass. "Which brings us back to you." He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. The casual posture did nothing to lessen his intimidating presence. "I know who you're not. Now you're going to tell me who you are. And you will tell me why you're so desperate to see Walter Thorne burn that you would walk into hell itself to light the match." The moment for lies was over. Looking into his unflinching gaze, she knew that only the unvarnished truth held any value now. Perhaps it was the whiskey fumes, or the profound exhaustion, or the simple fact that she had nothing left to lose. The story came pouring out of her, not in a torrent, but in a steady, controlled narrative of grief. She spoke of her father, an honest shipping merchant driven to financial ruin by Thorne's predatory tactics. She spoke of the night they lost everything, the shame that drove her father to take his own life, and the subsequent heartbreak that had stolen her mother's will to live. She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, cold, and hard as steel. It was a story she'd recounted to herself in the dark 1,000 times, a catechism of vengeance. "My name is Clara Hayes," she concluded, her voice hollow in the silent room, "and Walter Thorne took everything from me. I came here to find the proof I needed to give to the authorities. Proof that would destroy him in the way he destroyed my family." Arthur listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. The only sign of his reaction was the steady, rhythmic tap of his finger against his glass. When she finished, a long, heavy silence descended. He stared into the depths of his whiskey, as if searching for an answer. "The authorities," he finally said, a note of dark amusement in his voice. "You think the law will touch a man like Thorne? He owns judges and coppers like he owns the buildings they work in. You'd hand them your proof, and the next day you'd be a name in the obituaries. Another tragic accident. I had to try," she whispered, the last of her defiance draining away, leaving only a vast, empty despair. He looked up then, and his grey eyes pierced through her. "Thorne didn't just ruin your father, Clara Hayes. He was my partner once. We built this enterprise together. But his greed was a cancer. He grew violent, reckless. He betrayed me, tried to have me killed so he could take it all. The war he's arming for. It's to finish the job." The confession hung in the air, a shocking, unexpected bridge between their two worlds. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a man who had been betrayed. In his eyes, she saw not the cool detachment of a killer, but a reflection of her own burning grievance. He saw in her not a spy to be eliminated, but a kindred spirit, a soul forged in the same fire of loss and betrayal. He pushed himself off the desk and walked towards her. She flinched, expecting the end, but he stopped before her, his expression a mixture of calculation and something else, something she couldn't dare to name. "You have two choices," he said, his voice low and intense. "The first is the one you expect. I kill you. I dispose of your body, and the world forgets the name Clara Hayes. You become another ghost haunting this city." She braced herself, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. "Or," he continued, his gaze holding hers captive, "there is a second choice. You want vengeance. I want to protect what's mine and eliminate a threat. Our goals are aligned. Walter Thorne is our common enemy." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I'm not going to kill you, Clara. I'm going to make you a proposition." She stared at him, bewildered, her mind struggling to keep pace. "Your plan was flawed. You move like a shadow, your instincts are sharp, and you have more courage than any man I know. But you're an amateur playing in a professionals' league. Alone, Thorne will crush you. But with me, with my resources, my men, my power, we can crush him." He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take the camera from her numb fingers. He set it on the desk beside the incriminating ledger. "I'm offering you an alliance," he said, his voice dropping, becoming almost hypnotic. "Stay, work with me. Give me your intelligence, your fire, your thirst for justice. In return, I will give you your revenge. A true, lasting revenge that the law could never provide. We will dismantle Thorne's empire piece by piece, until there is nothing left but dust." Her head was spinning. This was impossible. It was madness. Ally herself with a killer, a bootlegger, become a part of the world that had destroyed her family. As if reading her thoughts, he added, "I'm not offering you a job as my spy. I am not looking for a subordinate." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "I am offering you a throne. Stand by my side. Be my equal in this war." He is the king of clubs, brutal and careless. I am the king of spades, who digs the graves. But every king needs a queen, one who is clever and ruthless, and sees the whole board. He held out his hand. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, a pact. "Let me help you get your vengeance, Clara," he whispered, his voice a silken promise. "And in return, you will help me win my war. You will be my queen." Clara looked at his outstretched hand. She looked at his face, no longer that of a monster, but of a man offering her the one thing she craved more than life itself. It was a deal with the devil, a path into a darkness from which she might never return. But it was also the only path that led to Walter Thorne's destruction. In that moment, her fear was consumed by the roaring inferno of her hatred. She had walked into hell to light a match, and its king was offering her a torch. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and absolute. It was the seal on a dangerous, irrevocable bargain. "All right, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady for the first time that night. "You have yourself a queen." The pact made in the dead of night transformed everything. The mansion was no longer a prison, but a fortress, and Arthur was no longer her captor, but her confederate. An electric current of purpose and shared danger now arced between them, replacing the fraught tension of their cat-and-mouse game. Clara Hayes was reborn. She shed the meek skin of Dorothy Edwards and stepped into her new role with a chilling, exhilarating focus. She was no longer a lone ghost seeking retribution. She was a strategist, a partner in a clandestine war. Their days became a whirlwind of covert planning. The library, once Arthur's solitary domain, became their war room. Maps of the city were spread across the massive mahogany desk, marked with the locations of Thorne's warehouses, speakeasies, and distribution points. Clara's meticulous, academic mind proved to be her greatest weapon. She absorbed the information Arthur provided, cross-referencing names from his ledgers with society pages and business registries she had memorized during her time in the archives. She saw patterns he had missed, connections between seemingly legitimate businessmen and Thorne's criminal network. Arthur, in turn, treated her not as a subordinate, but as a true equal. He listened to her insights with a focused intensity, his sharp mind challenging her theories and building upon her strategies. He began to see the city not just as a territory to be controlled by force, but as an intricate web of influence and information that could be manipulated. He taught her the language of his world, the codes, the hierarchies, the brutal but unwritten rules of honor among thieves. Thorne's weakness isn't his muscle, Clara explained one evening, tracing a line on the map with her finger. It's his vanity. He craves legitimacy. He wants the respect of the city's elite, the people who secretly buy his liquor but publicly scorn him. Arthur looked up from the ledger he was studying, a thoughtful expression on his face. The annual St. Jude's Masquerade Ball is on Saturday, hosted by Judge Harrington. Thorne will be there, preening like a peacock. He's a major contributor to the judge's charity fund, and Judge Harrington is in his pocket, Clara finished, a cold smile touching her lips. It's the perfect opportunity, not for violence, but for intelligence. It's a nest of snakes. If we can get inside, we can listen. We can see who he speaks to, who avoids him, who owes him favors. Arthur's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam. He admired her audacity. Getting inside is the easy part. I'm always invited, and it's the city's way of keeping its enemies close. But you can't go as Dorothy Edwards. No, Clara agreed. Dorothy Edwards is gone. I'll go as myself, as your partner. The idea was bold, a public declaration of their new alliance. It would set tongues wagging and put a target on both their backs. It was perfect. The night of the ball, the mansion buzzed with a different kind of energy. Clara stood before the full-length mirror in her room, a stranger in her own skin. Arthur had spared no expense. A dress of shimmering midnight blue silk and intricate beadwork had been delivered, its modern, dropped-waist silhouette a symbol of the new woman she was becoming. It clung to her body in a way that was both elegant and audacious. Her hair was styled in fashionable waves, and a delicate silver mask inlaid with sapphires and tiny diamonds rested on her vanity. When she descended the grand staircase, Arthur was waiting for her in the foyer. He was the epitome of dangerous elegance in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was the look in his eyes that made her breath catch. He wasn't looking at a spy or a strategist. He was looking at a woman, his expression a potent mixture of admiration and a raw possessiveness that sent a shiver down her spine. He held out a small velvet box. Inside lay a necklace of cascading diamonds that glittered like frozen tears. "Every queen needs her crown," he said, his voice a low murmur. As he fastened the clasp at the back of her neck, his fingers brushed against her skin, a touch that was as intimate and binding as their handshake in his office. "Tonight, we show them who we are. No fear, Clara. No fear," she repeated, the diamonds feeling cool against her heated skin. The ballroom at Judge Harrington's estate was a dazzling spectacle of opulence and hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers rained light upon a swirling sea of flapper dresses, sharp tuxedos, and jewel-toned masks. A jazz band played a lively, infectious rhythm, but beneath the music, the air was thick with whispered secrets and calculated smiles. As Arthur and Clara entered, a hush fell over the immediate crowd. Heads turned. Arthur Blackwood was a known quantity, a powerful shadow in their midst, but the woman on his arm, a stunning, unknown vision with fire in her eyes, was a mystery. "Smile," Arthur murmured, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "We're not here to hide. We're here to be seen." They moved through the room, a vision of united power. Arthur nodded to acquaintances, his expression unreadable, while Clara's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, cataloguing faces, noting the subtle interactions. She saw Walter Thorne holding court near the champagne fountain. He was a large, imposing man with a florid face and small, cunning eyes that darted about nervously. He exuded an aura of brutish arrogance, a stark contrast to Arthur's coiled, predatory grace. "Let's dance," Arthur said, leading her to the floor. He pulled her into his arms, and the world outside of their embrace melted away. They moved together with a fluid, unspoken synchronicity. For all their strategic planning and shared purpose, this was the first time they had touched since that violent, desperate kiss. But this was different. This was a partnership, a claim. "Thorne is talking to Councilman Roberts," Clara whispered, her lips close to his ear as they swayed to the music. "And Roberts looks terrified. I'd wager Thorne is leveraging his gambling debts." "Alderman Finch just handed Thorne an envelope," Arthur countered, his gaze fixed over her shoulder. "Finch oversees the zoning permits for the new dockyards. Thorne is making his move to control the waterfront." They were a perfect team, their minds working in concert, exchanging vital intelligence under the cover of a romantic waltz. The dance was more than a dance. It was a statement. As the song ended, they found themselves face to face with Thorne himself. "Blackwood," Thorne sneered, his eyes raking over Clara with undisguised insolence. "I didn't realize you were bringing company. Who's this lovely little thing?" Before Clara could react, Arthur stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle, protective gesture. "Thorne," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "this is Miss Hayes, my partner, and you will show her the respect she is due." Thorne's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in contempt. "Partner? You've gotten sentimental in your old age, Arthur." He laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Be careful, little bird," he said to Clara. "His cages may be gilded, but they're cages all the same." "I'm not in a cage," Clara replied, her voice steady and cold. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The confrontation was cut short as they were swept back into the party, but the threat had been made, the lines drawn. They stayed for another hour, gathering the last pieces of information they needed, their united front, a clear message to everyone in the room. They left through a side entrance, leading to a secluded garden path to avoid the crowds. The cool night air was a welcome relief, but as they walked toward where Arthur's Bentley was parked, the idyllic quiet was shattered. Two dark sedans, their engines off, were parked in the shadows. Doors flew open, and dark figures emerged, the moonlight glinting off the barrels of Thompson's submachine guns. An ambush. "Get down," Arthur roared, shoving Clara behind a large stone fountain just as the air erupted with the deafening chatter of gunfire. Stone chips exploded around them as bullets tore into their cover. Arthur drew a sleek, dark pistol from inside his tuxedo jacket, his movements impossibly fast. He returned fire, not with wild panic, but with a calm, lethal precision. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was surprisingly clear. The fear was there, but it was a cold, sharp thing, honing her senses. She saw one of Thorne's men trying to flank them. "Arthur, your left!" she screamed over the din. He pivoted and fired twice, the man crumpling to the ground. In the chaos of the firefight, a bond was being forged between them, hotter and stronger than any pact. It was a bond of blood and survival. He wasn't just protecting an ally, he was protecting her. His ferocious, desperate defense of her was a revelation. One of the sedans roared to life, its headlights pinning them like insects. Arthur grabbed her arm. "Run! To the car!" They sprinted across the open ground, bullets whipping past them. Arthur shoved her into the driver's side of the Bentley. "Drive," he commanded, laying down covering fire before diving into the passenger seat. Clara didn't hesitate. She slammed the car into gear, the powerful engine roaring to life. She stomped on the accelerator, sending gravel flying as the Bentley fishtailed onto the main drive. A rear window shattered, spraying glass over the leather seats. She kept her foot pressed to the floor, her eyes locked on the road ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. They careened out of the estate gates and disappeared into the night, leaving the chaos and the gunfire behind them. They didn't speak until they were miles away, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. Clara pulled the car to the side of a deserted road, her body trembling with the aftershock. Arthur reached over, his hand covering hers on the steering wheel. His touch was warm and steadying. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She looked at their joined hands, then at his face, illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. In the crucible of the attack, their alliance had been tested by fire and sealed in blood. He had protected her, and she had trusted him. The last vestiges of doubt and fear she had harbored about him were burned away, replaced by a fierce, undeniable certainty. This was her path. This was her partner. This was her king. The aftermath of the ambush was not a retreat into fear, but a declaration of war. Thorn had shown his hand, resorting to the crude brutality that Arthur had long since evolved beyond. The attack solidified Clara's resolve into something unbreakable, replacing the cold ache of vengeance with a white-hot, righteous fury. She was no longer just seeking justice for her family. She was fighting for her own life, and for the life of the man who had shielded her with his own body. The partnership, forged in strategy and sealed in blood, now entered its final, lethal phase. They did not strike back with bullets. That was Thorn's game, a blunt instrument for a blunt man. Their revenge would be a masterpiece of surgical demolition, designed not merely to kill an empire, but to methodically erase it from existence. For the next week, the mansion was a hive of silent, purposeful activity. Clara barely slept, fueled by black coffee and an all-consuming focus. She worked alongside Arthur, their minds a single synchronized weapon. Using the intelligence gathered at the ball and the incriminating details from the ledger, she constructed a web, and Walter Thorn was the spider blissfully unaware he was about to be caught in it. The plan had 3 prongs, a trident aimed at the heart of Thorn's operation. The first prong was financial. Clara spent 2 days poring over bank records and shipping manifests that Arthur's contacts had acquired. She traced Thorn's network of shale corporations and illicit accounts, creating a detailed and undeniable map of his money laundering operations. The final dossier was a thing of cold, beautiful, logic-irrefutable proof of massive tax evasion and fraud. It was packaged anonymously, along with a typed, detailed letter, and sent by a trusted courier to the one man in the city Thorn couldn't buy, a dogged, ambitious federal prosecutor at the Treasury Department known for his incorruptibility and his hatred of organized crime. "This won't put him in jail tomorrow," Clara explained to Arthur as they watched the courier depart, "but it will trigger a federal investigation that will freeze his assets and strangle his legitimate businesses. We're cutting off his oxygen." And the second prong was logistical. Arthur took the lead, dispatching his most trusted crews, using the information Alderman Finch had unwittingly provided at the ball. They knew Thorn was expecting his largest ever shipment of firearms at a secluded dock on the Industrial Canal. The night before the delivery, Arthur's men moved in. They didn't engage in a firefight. Instead, they sabotaged the cranes, blocked the access roads with staged vehicle breakdowns, and paid a visit to the harbor master, ensuring the dock would be closed for emergency repairs for the next 48 hours. Simultaneously, Other teams hit Thorne's primary liquor warehouses, not to steal the whiskey, but to contaminate it, breaking open barrels of foul-smelling fish oil and dumping them into the vats. His product was now worthless, his supply chain was crippled, and his reputation for reliability was shattered. The third and final prong was personal. It was Clara's masterpiece, the culmination of her long-nurtured thirst for retribution. It was aimed directly at Thorne's pride. The night of the reckoning arrived with a cold, biting wind that rattled the windows of the mansion. There was a solemn, almost sacred air between Arthur and Clara. They stood in his office, the same room where she had been unmasked, now the command center for their final assault. "My teams are in position," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble of anticipation. "The docks are locked down. The warehouses are ruined. The federal prosecutor received your gift this morning. It's time, she agreed, her heart a steady, determined drumbeat. She was not afraid. She felt a profound and chilling sense of clarity. They didn't drive the Bentley. They took a nondescript black sedan, Arthur at the wheel, Clara beside him. They drove through the glittering, oblivious city towards the industrial district, a grim landscape of brick warehouses and smokestacks silhouetted against the inky sky. Their destination was Thorne's main stronghold, the same warehouse where he was meant to receive his shipment of guns. It was here that they would deliver the final blow. Arthur pulled the car into a dark alley across the street, cutting the engine. From their vantage point they could see the warehouse. Lights blazed from within, and the panicked, angry shouts of Thorne's men carried on the wind. They knew something was wrong. Their shipments were late, their communications were failing. They were blind and confused. "He's in there," Arthur said, his hand resting on the pistol tucked into his waistband. "My men are ready to move in." "No," Clara said, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was firm, stopping him. "No guns, not for this. You promised me my revenge. Let me do this my way." He looked at her, his stormy eyes searching her face. He saw not a woman seeking bloodshed, but an architect of ruin demanding to see her design to its conclusion. He saw the girl who had lost everything, and the queen who had risen from the ashes. He nodded slowly, a gesture of absolute trust. "Your stage." Clara took a deep breath and got out of the car. She walked across the street, her heels clicking purposefully on the broken pavement, a solitary, resolute figure approaching the lion's den. As she neared the massive loading bay door, two of Thorne's guards stepped out to intercept her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and aggression. "This is private property, lady. Get lost." Clara didn't even break her stride. "I have a message for Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice carrying with an authority that made them hesitate. "Tell him Clara Hayes is here to collect a debt." The name meant something to them. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossed their faces. One of them disappeared back inside. A moment later, Walter Thorne himself appeared in the doorway, his large frame silhouetted against the harsh interior light. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "You," he spat, his voice dripping with venom, "Blackwood's little whore. You have a nerve coming here." "This isn't about Arthur," Clara said, stopping a few feet from him. She was utterly calm. "This is about my father, William Hayes. Do you remember the name?" Thorne's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second. "I've ruined a lot of men. I can't be expected to remember all of them." "You'll remember this," Clara said, and then she began to dismantle him, not with a weapon, but with words. She told him in a clear, unwavering voice exactly what she had done. She told him about the dossier sent to the Treasury Department, detailing every dollar he had stolen and hidden. She told him about his crippled supply lines, his worthless inventory, his shipment of guns that would never arrive. She told him about the allies who were already turning on him, the whispers of his downfall already spreading through the city's underworld. She stripped him of his power, layer by layer, with the cold, precise truth. "You're a bully and a fool, Walter," she finished, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You built an empire of sand, and the tide has just come in. You didn't just lose your money tonight, you lost your power. And without that, you're nothing." For a moment, Thorne was speechless, his face turning a shade of purple. The rage in his eyes was terrifying. He lunged for her, his big hands reaching for her throat. "You lying bitch!" He never reached her. From the shadows of the alley, Arthur and a dozen of his men emerged, moving with a silent, deadly efficiency. They surrounded Thorne and his few remaining guards before they could even draw their weapons. There was no shootout. It was a swift, brutal, and silent takedown. Thorne, disarmed and held firmly by two of Arthur's men, stared at Clara with pure, unadulterated hatred. He was defeated, not by a hail of bullets, but by the quiet, relentless intelligence of a woman he had dismissed and wronged. Arthur walked to stand beside Clara, a king beside his queen. He looked down at the pathetic, ruined man. "It's over, Walter." Clara looked at the man who had destroyed her world. She felt no triumph, no elation, just a vast, quiet emptiness. The fire of vengeance that had burned inside her for so long was finally extinguished, leaving behind a clean, cold peace. Her father was avenged. Her family was honored. Her war was over. She turned away from Walter Thorne, leaving him to Arthur's justice, and walked back towards the car without a backward glance. The past was finally done with her. The city awoke the next morning to a new reality. Walter Thorne had vanished, not in a blaze of headline-grabbing glory or a hail of bullets, but with the quiet finality of a whisper extinguished in the wind. Rumors swirled like smoke in the city's speakeasies that he'd fled, that he'd been taken for a one-way ride by federal agents, that he'd simply been erased. The truth was known only to a select few. His empire, already gutted and bleeding, crumbled overnight. His lieutenants, stripped of their power and facing federal indictments, scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The war was over. Arthur Blackwood was the undisputed solitary king of the city's glamorous and brutal underworld. But his victory felt different this time. It wasn't a conquest born of force, but a triumph of strategy. It was quieter, cleaner, and far more absolute. And it was not his alone. In the days that followed, a new order settled over the mansion. The palpable tension of war was replaced by a deep, resonant calm. The strategic partnership between Arthur and Clara had reached its conclusion, leaving them in an undefined, unspoken space. The mission that had bound them together was complete. Clara found herself adrift, the purpose that had driven her for years now fulfilled. The emptiness she'd felt in the warehouse lingered, a hollow echo where the fire of vengeance used to be. She was free, but she had never felt more uncertain of her place in the world. She began to pack the few belongings she had, preparing to leave the gilded cage that had become her fortress. She had her revenge. It was time to disappear, to try and build a life from the ashes of the one she'd reclaimed. She was folding the last of her dresses into a suitcase when Arthur appeared in her doorway. He didn't knock, simply leaned against the frame, watching her with that same unnerving intensity she remembered from their first meeting. But now, his eyes held no suspicion, only a deep, unreadable emotion. "Running away, Miss Hayes?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "My work here is done," she replied, not looking at him, focusing on the careful crease of a silk blouse. "I have what I came for." "Do you?" he challenged softly. He walked into the room, stopping behind her. "You have your revenge, but what will you do with the peace it has brought you? Go back to a quiet life? Become an archivist again? Do you truly believe you can go back to being the person you were before?" His question struck a chord deep within her. He was right. The woman who had walked into his mansion was gone forever. The quiet, academic Dorothy Edwards had been a lie, and the vengeful, grief-stricken Clara Hayes had served her purpose. The person left standing was someone new, someone forged in secrets and strategy, danger and desire, someone who had stood beside a king and helped him win his war. She turned to face him, her hands falling to her sides. "I don't know who I am anymore." "I do," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. "You were the woman who walked into the lion's den with nothing but her wits and a broken heart. You were the strategist who dismantled an empire without firing a shot. You were the queen who stood by my side in a storm of bullets and never once flinched." He took a step closer, his gaze holding hers. "The city is quiet now, under my control. But it's a different kind of control. Your influence, your way of thinking, it has changed everything. It's no longer just about power. It's about precision, respect. You've tempered my strength with your wisdom." He led her from the room, not by force, but with a gentle hand on her elbow, guiding her through the silent halls and out onto the grand stone balcony that overlooked the sprawling estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and molten gold. Below them, the city lights were beginning to twinkle to life, a vast constellation of promises and secrets. "I made you a promise," he said, turning to face her in the fading light. "I offered you a throne, but the war is over. The throne is secure. The question is, do you still want it?" Clara looked out at the glittering city, a kingdom won through her own intellect and will. Leaving it all behind felt like a betrayal of the woman she had become. Leaving him felt like tearing away a part of her own soul. Their love story was not one of gentle courtship and whispered sonnets. It was a story written in secret ledgers and coded glances, punctuated by gunfire and sealed with a kiss that was both a confrontation and a surrender. It was a strange, dangerous, and violent love, but it was real. It was theirs. "This was never just about revenge for you, was it?" she asked softly. "The alliance, it was more than that." "From the moment you walked into my library," he confessed, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed, "I saw a reflection of my own soul. I saw a fighter. I saw my equal. The alliance gave me an excuse to keep you close. The war gave us a common cause. But I don't want an ally anymore, Clara. I want a partner. In this life, in everything." He reached into his jacket pocket, but he didn't pull out a ring box. Instead, he produced a folded set of legal documents. He unfolded them and handed them to her. Her eyes scanned the first page, and her breath caught in her throat. It was the deed to the Hayes family estate, the home that had been stolen from her, the symbol of everything she had lost. It was now, impossibly, in her name. "I didn't just want to give you vengeance," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "I wanted to give you back your legacy, your past, so that you can choose your future." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes, not tears of grief, but of profound, overwhelming release. He hadn't just vanquished her demons, he had restored her foundations. She looked up from the deed and into his stormy grey eyes. In their depths, she saw not a gangster king, but a man offering her a world. He wasn't asking her to be his captive in a gilded cage. He was asking her to rule by his side, to build a new empire from the ashes of their shared past. "The past is done," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My future is here." She stepped forward, closing the final distance between them, and rose on her toes to meet his lips. This kiss was nothing like their first. It was not a battle, but a treaty. It was a slow, deep, and deliberate promise, a fusion of two powerful wounded souls who had found their unlikely salvation in each other. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his queen in his arms. As they stood on the balcony, Overlooking the kingdom they now ruled together, she knew she had found her place. She was not a ghost, not an archivist, not just an avenger. She was Clara Hayes, the woman who had walked into hell and been crowned its queen, not by birthright or by marriage, but by her own formidable strength. And beside her stood her king, their reign just beginning. True love is not always found in the light. Sometimes it is forged in the crucible of shared darkness, where two souls, scarred by the same fire of betrayal, recognize each other not as saviors, but as equals. The greatest alliances are born when vengeance gives way to a shared vision for the future, proving that the most powerful reign is not one of conquest, but of a partnership between a king and his queen.